Not long ago, I posted a video about the creatures that appear in the Hellboy films directed by Guillermo del Toro, and one of you reminded me of something very interesting. Just as Hellboy 2 features beings known as the Tooth Fairies, del Toro also wrote a film entirely focused on similar creatures, but with a much darker and more disturbing tone. Of course, I'm talking about the 2010 remake of Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. Because of that, today we'll explore the enigmatic, unsettling, and arguably even morbid creatures that inhabit that story. The Homunculi, also known as Tooth Fairies or underworld goblins. They're an ancient, malevolent race that lives in the shadows and has a ravenous hunger for teeth, especially children's teeth. These creatures are the main antagonists of the movie, written by Guillermo del Toro and Matthew Robbins, and directed by Troy Nixey in 2010. While inspired by the cult 1973 made-for-TV movie of the same name, this modern version expands on the concept with a darker, more psychological, and slightly poetic tone. In this video, we're going to take a deep dive into who the homunculi are, where they come from, what role they play in the story, how their physical design was conceived, what their powers and weaknesses are, and the symbolism they represent. We'll carry out a full exploration of these creatures from a film that may have flown under the radar for some, but which hides a very specific kind of horror. Because although they're small, these beings embody one of humanity's most primal fears, being ignored by those who are supposed to protect you, only to end up devoured alive in the dark. The original Don't Be Afraid of the Dark premiered in 1973 as a television film. Its premise was simple but effective. An adult woman named Sally Farnham moves with her husband into an old mansion inherited from her grandmother. Upon opening a fireplace that had been sealed shut, she accidentally releases small, hairy creatures that begin to torment her. The terror in that story wasn't just from the monsters themselves, but from the fact that no one believed her. In contrast, the 2010 remake reconfigures the story from the perspective of a young girl. This change is significant. It makes the horror more visceral, since we're now seeing everything through the eyes of a far more vulnerable protagonist. Moreover, the remake greatly expands the mythology, hinting at an ancient origin, introducing a previous owner named Lord Blackwood, and even suggesting that the creatures can transform humans into more of their kind. While the original focused more on suggestion and psychological tension, the 2010 version builds a more varied and darker universe, complete with internal rules and a degree of symbolism. It all begins with what seems like an innocent mistake. Sally, the young protagonist of the remake, is exploring the grounds of the old Blackwood mansion when she comes across a window covered in overgrowth, revealing a dark basement. Although the place had been sealed, her father, Alex, opens it with the intention of restoring it as part of the mansion's renovation project. But in truth, that basement is a prison, a sealed threshold meant to contain something that was never meant to wake again. That something is the homunculi, creatures that dwell beneath the house, hidden in darkness. Now, with new potential prey nearby, these beings return to activity, not with roars or screams, but with whispers. A faint voice begins calling Sally by name, speaking to her through air vents, the fireplace, in the darkest corners of the home. At first, Sally thinks they're imaginary friends, but she soon discovers that these beings weren't trying to play with her. They were luring her. But what exactly are these creatures? The homunculi are not fairies or goblins. In Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, their name carries a symbolic, somewhat mysterious weight. In alchemy, a homunculus is an artificial life form created from human elements through esoteric formulas. Del Toro and his team take this occult concept and reshape it into an allegory of evolutionary horror. Small creatures, yes, but with malicious intent and undeniable intelligence. These creatures don't kill out of instinct, nor do they hunt like wild animals. They have a mission to collect children's teeth, and they achieve this by manipulating their victims' emotions, ultimately transforming humans into more homunculi. This makes it clear they aren't wild beasts but an organized community, with hierarchy, purpose, and a kind of collective memory. Their presence implies that they've been operating in secret for centuries, hidden away, feeding on victims long forgotten by history. The film never explains their origin with precision, but all signs suggest they predate even the mansion itself. This positions them as a kind of mythological plague, an ancient horror buried by time, one humanity no longer knows how to confront. But what truly makes the homunculi memorable isn't just their narrative function, it's their design. They are small, yes, but far from harmless or simple. Their appearance is deeply disturbing. Guillermo del Toro, along with director Troy Nixey and concept artist Keith Thompson, created creatures that feel like they stepped out of a fairy tale, only described through the lens of a nightmare. The result is creatures with thin, slightly hunched bodies, covered in a fine layer of fur. Their arms and legs are disproportionately long, and their fingers end in black claws. Their eyes are milky, with no visible pupils, which could suggest blindness. Yet they move with great agility in complete darkness. They typically move on all fours, but can also climb, crawl, and walk upright. Additionally, they are able to squeeze through cracks in small spaces like rats. What makes the homunculi most terrifying is their strategic silence. They don't growl or screech, they observe, stalk, and communicate through whispers. Their behavior mirrors that of an intelligent species entirely devoid of empathy. It's unclear whether they attack out of hunger, but their malicious nature suggests that hunting is simply an inevitable extension of what they are. Guillermo del Toro explained it like this: "We wanted to create small, unstoppable creatures, absolutely ruthless little bastards. When something so small has absolutely no fear of you, it becomes incredibly terrifying." Despite their small size, the homunculi possess a range of abilities that make them extremely dangerous. They are incredibly strong for their size and build. They can knock down an unsuspecting adult, drag them, or even incapacitate them using tools and utensils like knives, screwdrivers, or ice picks. But their greatest weapon isn't brute force, it's strategy. These so-called tooth fairies act with a collective intelligence, planning coordinated attacks, manipulating their environment, and using psychological fear as a weapon. They cut power cables to cause blackouts, sabotage objects, and damage personal belongings to stir tension among humans and isolate their prey. This clearly shows that they are intelligent and tactical beings. However, they also have weaknesses. Bright light hurts and disorients them, often forcing them to retreat. This is why they aim to extinguish all light sources before attacking. Physically, they are also vulnerable. Though dangerous in groups, their small size makes them susceptible to being crushed or injured with blunt objects. But this isn't easy, as they are extremely agile. As previously mentioned, these creatures have the ability to transform others into more homunculi. This isn't shown explicitly in the film, but it is hinted at through multiple subtle details that build a more sinister truth. The victims dragged into their lair don't simply vanish. They become part of the swarm. That revelation comes at the end when we hear the voice of Kim, Alex's girlfriend, whispering among the creatures after sacrificing herself to save Sally. Her tone and way of speaking mimic those of the homunculi, leaving no room for doubt. Kim had now become part of the swarm. This leads to a truly macabre implication. The homunculi don't just collect teeth in human tissue as tribute or sustenance, but appear to use them as raw material to replicate and propagate their species. It's a dark, almost alchemical process that directly references the ancient concept of the homunculus as a being artificially created from human parts. This idea also gives deeper meaning to one of the film's most disturbing theories. Many viewers wonder how it's possible for a human, like Kim for example, to be transformed into such a small creature. But the answer is even more unsettling. She doesn't turn into one creature, but into many. Her body and essence are fragmented, reused, and distributed among several of these entities. It's a complete conversion in which the original identity dissolves entirely in favor of an infernal hive that multiplies using stolen flesh. But beyond the physical horror, Del Toro uses the homunculi as living metaphors, not just as creatures that hunt in the dark, but as representations of an inherently human idea: the loneliness of ignored childhood. What does this mean? It's clear that Sally, the protagonist, tries to ask for help. She expresses fear and gives clear signs, but the adults around her, her father, her therapist, even the police, dismiss her words as fantasy or emotional manipulation. Thus, the homunculi exist in that void between what children feel and what adults refuse to hear. They are the manifestation of unvalidated childhood fear, of the frustration of not being taken seriously when something truly terrifying is happening. Every whisper they utter doesn't just lure, it imitates the emotional language of a child desperate for attention. That's why Guillermo del Toro has said that the most disturbing element of this story is that the adults don't listen, and that neglect has consequences. One of the most interesting additions in the 2010 remake is the figure of Lord Blackwood, a 19th century painter who once lived in the mansion where the story takes place. Although not a central on-screen character, his presence is constantly felt. He appears in flashbacks, is mentioned in old documents, in whispered rumors, and most importantly, through a hidden mural that paints a macabre story. As Kim investigates further, she discovers that both Blackwood and his son vanished without a trace. And the most chilling revelation is that, in his desperation to get his son back, Blackwood offered human teeth to the homunculi as ransom. To do this, he murdered his own housekeeper and extracted her teeth as a tribute. But the creatures rejected the offering. In retaliation, they dragged him into their lair, said to be the underworld. But long before his disappearance, Blackwood left behind a cryptic mural depicting the abduction of his son, intended as a warning for the future. That's why some fans theorize that one of the current homunculi might actually be Blackwood himself, corrupted and transformed into a degraded entity who now serves as the swarm's leader, guiding the very creatures he once tried to appease. This theory stems from the fact that the design and facial features of the lead homunculus are strikingly similar to those of Lord Blackwood. Speaking of their appearance, the design of the homunculi is one of the most carefully crafted and well-developed elements of the film. While Troy Nixey is credited as director, it was Guillermo del Toro who closely supervised both the aesthetic and mythological creation of the creatures. From the very beginning, del Toro was adamant about not wanting generic monsters. He wanted beings that felt ancient, intelligent, and organic, like a species that had evolved in parallel to humanity, but deep underground. To achieve this, concept artists like Keith Thompson and Seth Engstrom were brought on board, and they worked with unusual references: hairless rats, bats, blind moles, insects, and fossils of extinct creatures. The goal was to blend the animal with the almost human, provoking a visceral, instinctive sense of unease in the viewer. Although physical sculptures and maquettes were made, most of the creatures were brought to life using computer animation. However, practical effects were also integrated to retain a tangible texture. The result is a coherent, eerie, and realistic design that moves fluidly on screen. With all that said, the ending of Don't Be Afraid of the Dark offers no comfort. There's no definitive victory, no real solution to the problem. Instead, the film leaves us with a bitter sense of defeat. The monsters have won, and the most unsettling part is knowing they will return, that at some point these creatures will come back for more victims, dragging others into the same fate. This open-ended finale not only heightens the horror, but also left the door slightly ajar for a sequel, which unfortunately never happened. Though personally, I'd love to see one. And with that, we reach the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell to stay updated on my latest videos. See you in the next one.
And we will wait. They will forget, and others will come.
Hey, don't go just yet. If you enjoyed this video, I've got another one I think you'll love. Check it out.